Showing workshop in Greenhouse 6 here at the Botanical Gardens. The Saturday session is filled up, so we opened up a Sunday session. And I will announce that. I'll put that out tomorrow for registration. Everything, we're going to have plenty of milk jugs. We'll have a limited amount of tools, so we plan on pre-prepping some of these jugs for you. But if you have any seeds you'd like to bring to Wintercell, to learn how to Wintercell, please bring those. This is a native plant for your body, so anybody who have annuals or vegetables that you want to try, bring those in. The object is, teach you how to Wintercell and get a little practice doing it. Yes?
We could use 2 or 3 people on Saturday and or 2 or 3 people on Sunday to help out, just assist. You don't have to be experts on anything, but if you want to come and be a part of it, it would be great. We'd like to have just some helpers at the different tables, because we have 40 people in each session, or 40 in the first session. So if you would be willing to just come, it's 9 to noon on Saturday, and maybe 9 to noon on Sunday.
It'll be 9 to noon on Sunday, same time.
But we could just use some people to hang out. And if you be willing to show up for that, could you just check in with me or Bob afterwards? We'll be right back here, because we need some help prepping these milk jugs, baby. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, please, we're interested in helpers, and we'd love y'all to attend. We'd like to see you at the workshops.
Great. Thanks, Bob.
Yeah, Bob? Yeah.
Okay, well, we're obviously still setting up, so that means I get to introduce Mayor Carroll a little bit longer. So I'm really delighted tonight to be able to welcome Mayor Carroll Hunter, who is a retired, or I should say Professor Emeritus in the Landscape Architecture program at the University of Michigan School for Environmental Sustainability. And I had the great pleasure of working with Mayor Carroll for well, we've both been retired for about 2 years now, but previous to that, we worked together for about 15 years, having offices right next to each other in the Dana building up on campus. And anyway, it was a great pleasure to work with her over those years. One of the things that impressed me greatly about Mary Carroll is the diversity of experiences and the really interdisciplinary nature of her research work and her teaching. She's a native Detroiter. She went to University of Detroit. Then she earned her BA at, you earned a BA from University of Detroit, right?
In communications.
In communications. Then she went to, is it Berkeley after
Berkeley.
that? Berkeley after that, and then earned her PhD from State University of New York in which campus?
Stony Brook.
Stony Brook. Well, I'm glad she's here to remind me of some of these details. But she also then, she worked for over 15 years as a biological researcher in a variety of labs around the country. She's married to a biological scientist too, and the two of them traveled to different places around the country. Eventually, she ended up deciding to return to school to earn a Master's of Landscape Architecture at the University of Georgia, so changing careers at that stage of her life. And after practicing for about 4 or 5 years, she joined the faculty at the University of Georgia. And fortunately for us, a few years after that, we were able to attract her to come to Michigan, where she finished out her career in teaching of landscape architecture. Her research really also reflects some of the her broad diversity of interest. She's very interested in issues relating to sustainability, to ecological integrity, but also on the human side, sort of looking at how humans relate to landscapes, and particularly design, and relate to various aesthetic patterns in the landscape. During her time here at Michigan, she became involved with a sort of a medical human health discussion group on campus that was made up partly of medical faculty and researchers, as well as people from a variety of other disciplines. And through some of those experiences and other things, she really expanded her research into looking at how design can help shape human health, mental and physical well-being. It's outgrowth of some of that work that leads to her talk tonight about what she's called the nature pill, and I'm sure she'll describe that a bit more, and how the value of nature in terms of our mental and physical well-being. And so, I don't know if you want to say a few words before we get your slides up, but
Sure,
otherwise.
because that could take a while.
So join me in welcoming Mary Carol Hunter. I should mention that she now resides up in Petoskey, Michigan, and so I'm particularly grateful that she made the long trip down here to speak to us.
Thank you, Bob. I take it this mic is not live. This mic is not alive.
That's not how it's
Oh,
done.
okay.
It's for recording.
Okay, I got it. Okay, can you hear me, or should I?
Yeah.
Okay, for some, yes, thank you. Turn the TV up, please. One of the things that I don't remember very often, but I just remembered from Bob's introduction, was my entry into the research area of environmental psychology. In some ways was just a continuation of all the research that I had done as an ecology and evolutionary biology researcher for the first whole part of my life before I went into landscape architecture. And during this period of time, I was interested in the way the genotypes of an animal interact with its environment and what impact that has on its own health and its population dynamics. But what made my research a little bit different and a little bit cumbersome, because it was annoying to evolutionary biologists, was that my focus was on something called maternal effects. And that's a situation where the environment of the mother is passed on in some way to her offspring that is not genetic. It could be regulatory gene adjustment, something like that, or it could be a bit of a toxic plant material that the mom can handle and the offspring can handle, but the microbes can't handle, that gives them a definite advantage. Could also give them a disadvantage. So I spent a couple of decades doing research on the impact of gene-environment interactions using insects as my model system. So when I turned to landscape architecture, it was in order to be able to help people get their environment straightened out faster. So what I saw was happening in the insect population in a review paper I subsequently found out is happening to humans all the time with pharmaceuticals. I could help adjust along with all the landscape architects that were already doing this kind of thing without having, my ulterior motives. And that is why I chose the field, and one of the reasons why it's so important, because we have the opportunity on the ground and in teaching students to make a change in the environment before there's a policy change or the money to fund something. We can just go right there to that first step when we're getting the designs that we have developed permitted to be built on the ground. And that can happen like in 12 months' time. So I found that this professional change was the perfect way to continue exactly what I was doing before. I changed from insects to humans, but it's still the same thing. It's still ultimately gene-environment interactions. So that's just my extra bit. And I do wish that I would have brought some of my extra Christmas cookies with me, because I could have handed them out while everybody's waiting for this to get set up. But, oh well, I guess we'll have to just eat them all at home. I'm trying to think if I could actually start the talk without the slides. I suppose I can. I suppose the headline topic of what I'm going to talk about today is the nature pill. It's the interface with nature, the experience that humans have with nature, and what impact that has on their well-being, be it mental or physical. My focus is almost primarily on the mental well-being impacts of interfacing with nature. So the nature pill is just a shorthand term for something that does the job. It's not a pharmaceutical, but like a pharmaceutical, what do we want to know? We want to know how much do we take, how often do we take it, and what kind of pill do we take. And so if you translate that into a nature experience, it's going to be how long do we have to stay out, how many times do we have to do it, and what kind of nature counts. What kind of nature will really make a difference to us psychologically and physically. And so the whole point of the main research that begins this seminar is to explain to you what that experimental design did and point out here and there in some ways why it was an important experiment to do. Primarily, people have known that they have known in their souls, and they've known intuitively probably for millennia, that interfacing with nature, as long as something's not going to come and kill you, is actually a really good thing. We have a variety of innate reactions. Our autonomic nervous system responds positively without thought or anything to things that are going to be good for us and things that are going to be our demise. So if we see something that suggests that there are resources that will keep us healthy, allow us to successfully reproduce and have our offspring be healthy, then that's going to have some kind of an innate attraction to us. This has been demonstrated very nicely by psychologists for some time now. And then in addition to that, we have all the other things that we bring to an experience, or a stimulus, let's just call it. So that could be something that was related to our culture, our upbringing, our own genetics, who we natively are, things that were fixed and developed with experience over time. So there are things about a nature experience that would involve those aspects of who we are. And you can imagine that this would change as we age and have more experiences, and it does. So one of the things the experiment that I set up was trying to do was to allow those innate experiences to be the bottom line. You could have all the rest of the stuff too, and that would cause noise in the response. Does nature give me better mental well-being measured in terms of stress? Does it reduce my stress? Okay, oh, that's great. Okay, that's very good. Okay, can you lower one set of, maybe the front set of lights in this room so that you can see it a little better? Oh, you can. Yeah, that's good. That's good. That's everybody can see now, and they can still see this. That picture is blurry. it's not the projector. Okay, so what I'm going to do in this talk, besides go down the avenue that I already began for you, is that I'm going to connect taking a nature pill, having a nature experience that reduces stress, as I'll demonstrate to you, and as other people have already shown as well, and how you can use that to support ecological resilience. So at the end of the day, the bottom line on all of this sustainability stuff is that we've got to have a bottom-up response. We've got to get everybody in on it, and everybody has to think that certain behaviors are good behaviors. There's got to be a cultural change, because if we wait for a top-down force to do it, it will take too long, there'll be too much arguing, there won't be enough money, and there won't be the will to accept what might be a really good decision from a top-down source. So this is going to be more about what we can do in terms of planting gardens, being designers, and just experiencing the world ourselves to help speed up that cultural change that'll make things better faster. These are a list of, not a complete list, of the types of improvements that have been shown repeatedly in cultures all around the world that are the outcomes of interfacing with nature. And it can happen in a 5-minute period of time, or on a 3-week retreat, or anything in between. But better mental health in all of those ways, stress reduction, better vitality, the experience of awe, which is like the latest thing in the news right now, because that deals not just with our emotional reaction, but what people might more commonly call a spiritual reaction. and that has a lot of uplift to it. And then attention restoration, the ability to focus, which we all know is a difficult thing these days with the screens going on. And then improved immune function, better physical well-being, better blood sugar regulation, weight control, better sleep, reduced inflammation, and then a variety of other things that are interesting and have their own stories. I only put up one reference here, and you'll notice on these slides that I often include a reference because during COVID we learned that it's really good to document more things in words on slides so that people can go back and look at it again. So she did an incredible job of bringing all different types of research together to put this list together, but a new review paper on this has just come out, and I didn't put that on there, but I can tell you later, that amplifies on this and adds new things. So it keeps going on and on. A lot of this stuff hits the news, and so a lot of people are well aware of the fact that being outside and being around nature does something good for you. Probably one of the best places to see a long-term set of studies that deal with all aspects of this are ones done by the Japanese, and they call forest bathing Shinrin-yoku, which is actually a made-up word the Japanese government came up with because they wanted people to start to develop a stronger affinity for natural places. And this was happening just at the time that the foothills of the very steep mountains were endangered of being, the forests in them, completely ruined by expansion of cities and industry and industrial concerns. And so they decided to try to pull a cultural shift on the population by getting them to really realize how critical these places were to them. So they said, we want you all to practice Shinrin-yoku. It is supported by the government. We want your jobs, your bosses at your jobs, your companies, to allow you time off to have this Shinrin-yoku experience because we know that forest bathing is going to make you healthier and it'll make our economy better and our country better. So that's what they said. And they didn't have any data for it in a scientific sense. Like I said, for millennia, people already knew this. But they did start the research program, which has subsequently been picked up, by many people all around the world. But if anybody's interested in looking it up, it's a wonderful story, and the research continues. The problem, we know we have a lot of research to tell us what we should do, what the benefits are, but we don't do it. And I know this when I was recruiting people to do this experiment and all the preliminary experiments, people that thought that they really used getting outdoors as one of their main, getaways, their relief from stress, found that it was very hard to do it on a regular basis. A couple of times a week is all I asked them to do. Too busy turns out to be the problem for everybody. And I think that during lockdown and then during the subsequent COVID years, we found that is very much to be the case. Suddenly people, from young to old discovered, my gosh, I go outside and I feel way better. This is great. And it wasn't just that it was, a diversion from being indoors. They realized that it was actually the experience with nature, which can be just looking at the sky. It doesn't have to be, going to a national park. So the too busy problem seems to be the behavioral one that we have to deal with here. And it's just like dieting or, exercise for good health and weight control and stuff like that. We all know the facts, but that doesn't really make any difference. We get that aesthetic experience if something smells good. There it goes. We have to get up for whatever we're doing. That's hard. So one of the things that goes along with this research is ancillary research that helps try to figure out how to help people get outside more often. The doctors are quite aware of this discrepancy. And some time back, a doctor named Robert Czar started the Park RX program. How many people here are familiar with that one? Okay, just a couple. Well, it's nationwide. Almost all states have subscribed to it, and Mexico has as well. And over the years, they've got it to the point where they're doing an incredible thing. Doctors are giving prescriptions for nature pills in the office. And when they first started doing it, they were just using common sense, the history of the patient, the age of the patient, and sort of what they thought, would work. And just by having it on the paper, they knew that they were getting a much better reaction than just saying, lose 10 pounds when, by the next time you come back. So one of the things that this program did was it set out to educate all the healthcare personnel that would be doing this. They told them how to do it efficiently, gave them all kinds of handout material, but much more importantly, they got in cahoots with all the park systems, federal, state, local, anybody that would be willing to help them out. And all of those parks offered to this organization GIS data that showed where parks were located, where their entrance were, linkages to them, and something about the place. So the doctor could just say, parks near me, or parks near me that do such and such if their patient had a limitation. And now they can identify places that the people can go, and they're starting to get a good common sense notion of what simple things they can tell them. You need to just walk up and down your neighborhood streets because you live in a really treed neighborhood. And we know that makes a huge difference, just walking down your street when there's trees, year-round. So this organization has sort of been behind the scenes pushing this out. And especially for children, they've been using this. Kids that have problems, often kids that have obesity problems that are associated with behavioral issues, has been very effective. So still, even with all this, we're still too busy. So one of the things that we didn't know anything about, despite all that I told you, was how long do you have to stay out? There have been many experiments done, and the answers were all over the board. But the methods that they used to test that were all over the board, and the methods that they used, none of them tried to control for the things that were causing this variation in, the result that each one of these studies gave. So that was the main goal of this experiment, was to try to rail that in. So I wanted to look at, and I did this work with two other people. They're both statisticians that helped with some of the analysis because it was a sticky analysis. So wanted to know what dose of nature is sufficient, how much do you have to make a difference in your well-being, and I use stress, as I said before, as the key variable because that's a good one and it's pretty easy to measure. And then what forms of nature are effective, so that the doctors that were given prescriptions or people that are trying to figure out, well, what's going to really work best for me the fastest, would have some starting point. So this is the whole deal with the experiment. This is how it worked. It's called, I borrowed a term, adaptive management, because what it allowed people to do is to make decisions about how they were going to go about taking this nature pill. So in most experiments like this, people are really pretty narrow, limited in what they can and can't do. But I knew that if I wanted a result that was going to have to do with what it would take for a regular person that has no time and has a completely unpredictable life, and the weather changes all the time, and oh, guess what just happened 2 minutes ago? What is the amount of time that will work for a person that's got all those limitations? So what they had to agree to be in this study, in order to be able to have a little bit of control, was to have a nature experience for at least 10 minutes. That's all they had to do, was just 10 minutes. They could do more if they wanted, but just 10 minutes, 3 times a week for 8 weeks. They could choose any place they wanted outside. And the only criteria for that quality of place was there was something, they had a sense of nature in that place. So it could be a daffodil. It could be something that was precious to them in nature, but is to no one else. It could be a tree they sat under. It could be a national forest. It could be the biggest city park. It could be their backyard. It could be any place. Because it's going to change from one day to the next what you have time to go to, right? And then they could choose the time of day, and the only stipulation there was that they had to wait an hour after they got up. That's because your cortisol levels have a natural diurnal response of their own, and it's really wacko the first hour after you get up, so not then. And then don't do it after dark for similar reasons. There's not good enough information about what happens. It gradually drops down during the night as you sleep, but we don't know much about it. So those were the two limitations on when they could take it. And they could choose any of these activities for this nature experience, sitting, walking, or any combination of those two things. They couldn't do aerobic exercise. They couldn't, during this period of time, use any kind of social media, the internet, no phone calls, no conversations, They could walk with somebody else if they needed to, or a pet, but they couldn't talk to the human or the pet. They just had to, you know. And that was really good because a lot of people were uncertain about going to a natural place or even walking around the block on their own. I mean, that was surprisingly part of it, which it never occurred to me, but they were allowed to have somebody, but no communication. And then nothing to eat or drink. The water was allowed as long as it wasn't on a day that we were doing the cortisol samplings. But no food, because then your whole blood sugar thing would get, you'd be a different person. So by the way, all of the point of that was to help people be in the moment of where they were and to have as least disruption to their natural system of stress response to the environment outside. I also gave them an app, which we hired this great guy who came up with the program for it. We did all the graphics, and it worked great. People loved it. In fact, I was told by many of them that the reason they were able to continue this for 8 weeks was because they loved using the app. It made them feel like they checked the box. So that would automatically record by simply, one button press, the date, the location, the start and the end times, and they had to answer a couple of questions at the beginning, like what kind of a place they were in, and some other things. And they were allowed to actually use their phones, not connected to the universe or the metaverse, to take a picture if they wanted to, something that really moved them. And it turned out, again, this was another feature that really kept people on point. They loved to look for the thing that they were going to photograph, because of course that keeps them in their place instead of ruminating on what just happened or what's just about to happen. So I always tell people that if you're really distressed, go out for a walk and find something you like to photograph, and that'll just fix you. So to measure the stress, this didn't happen for every single one of these events. People wouldn't have withstood that. But over the period of time, because there's learning involved, every 2 weeks, at the beginning, and then for every 2 weeks, they had to have a day where they collected a saliva sample before they began their nature experience, and then again after. Then we sent those to the lab to be analyzed for the amount of cortisol, and cortisol was chosen because it's a relatively easy to measure hormone, and it's the most reliable stress hormone you can measure. And as you can see from this, they had to chew a big old cotton roll, and a lot of people weren't too sure about that. It wasn't even the physical experience they were sure of. They were embarrassed to do it out in public. But I know from talking to them afterwards that as time went on, they could do it any place. Okay, this was the result. The blue, I just put the dotted line up there so you can see where horizontal is. The blue line is the normal reduction in cortisol as the day goes on. Your natural diurnal cycle, it gradually drops during the day after you have this like blip when you first wake up. Then it gradually goes down. This has been linearized for the statistics, but it's a curve that goes down. So that's blue. So that would be your status quo. And then the red line is where the cortisol level after the nature pill. So it's the difference between the blue line and the red line that tells you how much of a drop over the normal drop in cortisol you have that it allows. Now, of course, our cortisol does fly all around, but this is an add-on, and it's measured in a very controlled way, relatively speaking. And so it is a really good measure of this. So the diurnal effect, all told, caused about an 11.5% drop in cortisol, and the nature experience was an additional 21% drop, an additional drop of 21%. So that's pretty good. Okay, which thing? Now, in terms of efficiency, because this is what we all really want to know, how little do we have to do to really get the big effect? So Brenda came up with this. It was a brilliant idea. We ended up dividing this time frame temporally, and we looked at every 10-minute interval to see if there was a change in the slope. So there you can see that the red line originally in the last one had a single slope, but if you divide it up, that's an average slope, you'll see this. And so what we discovered was that between 20 and 30 minutes, you had the greatest efficiency, the greatest drop in cortisol for the time available. So if you're going to go out for a nature pill, 20% would be the minimum, and if you 20 to 30%, you're really going. You're really taking care of your stress, and then after it continues to add on as a stress reduction. It's just that it's not as fast. So that was a pretty good starting point. And this paper went like nuts in the news. It had a news, what do they call that? A news? No. Those news periodicities. They just lasted forever. And so now everybody uses 20 minutes for their experiments. And they always say 20 minutes, 20 minutes. Which is great, because that's what we all wanted. We wanted to have something that everybody could use. That's the key. You don't want just one person using it or one doctor using it. You want everybody thinking, okay. And it turns out that you will still get some impact in less than 20 minutes. If you practice this yourself, you'll know it inside yourself when it happens. And there's usually a lot to do with the degree of stress that you're having, how long it takes you to get to that point. But I know myself before any of these results came in, because I tried all these experiments on myself about 4 years before this experiment started, because I was trying to figure out what could go wrong in the experiment. So I did this for 4 years before I did the experiment, and I knew that me personally, just at about the 20-minute mark, on average, if there was any kind of problem, I had to go for 20 minutes or it wasn't gonna, and I did this year round, even in the snow, ice, every single day the first year. And I know that is just about right. But I also know that I could do it in 5 minutes.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Is that the same as you walk in the neighborhood, and is that the same?
Yes.
time?
Yes. Yeah. As long as you feel like there's some nature around, then and you could even be in an industrial setting that was quite unappealing. And if the sky was amazing, as it often is in Michigan, and you're looking at that sky, that takes care of it. That'll do it for you. So it doesn't have to be, this whole parky kind of thing. Yes?
Is there any comparison between summer, winter, and fall?
That's a wonderful question. And if I hadn't had retire, I would have done that. In fact, I still could do that. People have not, almost no one has looked at the differences between seasons, because we've had such a hard time getting our handle on it just, when everything's nice out. But there's a paper that came out in 21 on the winter effect, and that paper showed that they did the experiments like the Japanese are doing the Shinrin-yokus, and you can't get this kind of a result on it. But the result was that in the wintertime, people were able to get a good, they subjectively reported an improvement in their mental state. So yes, winter should work just fine based on that 21 paper. And that's the first one I saw that actually did an experiment that you could, you felt was a reliable design to look at winter. I know myself, winter, and people I've talked to, winter is almost easier than summer.
Emeritus, part of your experiment was not talking to anybody. Is that something that you think is important?
I think that companionship while you're walking is often as therapeutic, and sometimes more, than just going by yourself. But I had to eliminate it because it would add noise that I wouldn't be able to control. I wouldn't know how often or how much of the time. So it was put in there strictly for that reason, and it was a tug, because there's been tons of work done just recently too on the importance of having a pal, going out with other people, no matter what you do, or just being with other people doing things, how isolated we become as human beings, how important that is. So definitely that. Personally, I would say that from what I've seen and what I've talked to people about, there's almost a different kind of healing that happens when you're by yourself. And maybe that gets more into the awe category, and wherever that takes another part of you. Because awe is now being considered another state, character state that's not emotional. For a while people were putting it in with emotional, but now they know that the premise for it is completely different. So I would say that it could have but it has effects on all the levels. But and if you go out with somebody, it's very hard to be in the present. Always, almost impossible, because you almost always talk about what happened that time or what you're hoping will happen. If you pay attention, that's usually with the conversation. Or you're talking about work, and then, about work, not gossip work, and then you're not present. If you talk on the phone when you're outside, I've noticed you still get some impact. And I won't say this, this is anecdotal data, but I can tell you right now that a certain component of that reaction that we have when we're outside is what I was saying right at the very beginning. It's part of the autonomic nervous system response. We're hardwired. We're hardwired to respond to it, whether we're paying any attention or not. So if you are out and you're talking on the phone, your body is still, your senses are still getting that information in, and it's still doing, at least to some degree, what it can do. And there have been a number of studies, including one done maybe about 10 years ago by one of Rachel Kaplan's last students, that was all about this, not paying any attention, high school kids in the cafeteria socializing. But if there was a big window with nature outside versus a building and no nature, there were a whole bunch of criteria that they measured that changed on those kids. And their learning was better and all kinds of stuff. So we know that even if you go out with other people, it's better to, if you're going to go out with other people, go out with them. Don't stay in with them. That would be, because you'll at least get the benefit of what your innate reaction is going to be. And unless you have some danger coming along, a lion around the bend or something like that, most of what we see is pretty placid in the sense that it's going to be a positive thing. So measuring the quality of nature. Now this could be like another two other seminars, but I'm going to just give you one little tidbit that had directly to do with this experiment and the app. One of the things that they had to do. Oh, I'm sorry. One of the things that they had to do is they had to say what kind of a place they were in. So you can see from that list we had sort of the backyard, front porch experience included, street tree experience, etc. And then we also asked them if they found a place that they really liked to give us a photograph. And so there's ways you can analyze these photographs, and some of that is in these two papers down here. If anybody's interested, they can look at them. But the main thing that I'd like to point out here is how does the quality of nature influence the well-being response? That is to say, the stress level. And what we found was that the greater restoration, greater stress reduction happened in small public green spaces and in private green spaces, which are primarily someplace right around your house, someplace you feel completely comfortable in. So that means you don't have to go far for this. And a lot of people did that during COVID. They just walked outside and went in their yard or sat on their porch. And they liked it. It worked. It helped. There's been a decrease in nature interactions globally, and particularly in developed countries, not surprising given our technology. Some people call this the extinction of experience. So think of it as the extinction of nature experience. And it's that loss of a very direct interaction with it on a regular basis. So where do we get an effective nature pill in the city? Well, we've already talked about that through Q&A and some other things so far, but this is, I'm using as a pivot point to move into the next part of the talk, which has to do with ecological resilience. And as I said before, I think that we could build ecological resilience as a community, a global community even, if we do a number of things that grow stewardship and grow stewardship in public places so other people can have that happen without necessarily having the intention of having that be the outcome. So to design for stewardship, there's two experiments I'm going to tell you about, two studies. One is about protecting what we already care about, or bringing what we care about to the attention of people so they can then decide whether they're going to care for it or not. And the second is about we do stewardship by example, and then we do it in a way that's flashy enough or intriguing enough to others that social contagion is the outcome, and people start imitating you like you were an influencer or something. We didn't even have these words when this experiment was done, and that works. And then the second, finally, to do the actual ecological resilience part of it in streetscapes and in public spaces is something that I think that the wild ones is particularly close to all of your heart, because you have to actually design and plant the spaces with forms and plant combinations that will mitigate environmental disruption, particularly climate change. So does anybody know, am I supposed to be done by, I know it's not 8? I don't know when I started. I started about 7. Okay, I can be done by 8 for sure. I'm going to have to talk really fast. Okay. So design for stewardship by protecting what we care about. This is a story about the emerald ash borer and what happened in many neighborhoods in Ann Arbor. So how many of you were in a neighborhood of or adjacent to that had all the street trees wiped out by the emerald ash borer? Okay, so you're pretty familiar with this story. Yeah, so this was a natural experiment that nobody had to do. It happened. And then the city was trying to figure out what to do with all these dead trees in all of these neighborhoods that looked like they had just been bombed or something. So I took advantage of that, and I looked to see what people's attitudes was toward the loss of their trees on their streets through a survey. And then I surveyed people on the adjacent street, the close adjacent street that lost no trees, and asked them the same questions just to see if that loss, you don't know what you got till it's gone, feeling translated into stewardship, even if they were some distance from the actual core of the problem. So these maps just show the density of ash loss in Ann Arbor, so you can probably find your neighborhood up there. Darker it gets, the more trees were lost. Huh? Okay, why is this not working? Oh, there. I had turned it upside down. That must be a trick. Okay, so I chose 24 treatment streets, and that was extensive loss of street trees. Over 70% of the street trees were gone. You can really see this in the winterscape picture. And then 24 control streets, and they were adjacent, and that was less than 30% loss. And I matched them, the pairwise streets, 24 pairs, by cost of the house, size of the lot, age of the development, so that they would be culturally equivalent. Had the bad problem, didn't have the bad problem, but have to live with it next door. So the sense of stewardship was amplified when the trees were lost. So there were a variety of questions asked, but one of them was this comes to the stewardship aspect, willingness to volunteer for tree planting. And the homeowners experience who had lost a tree were twice as likely to say they would be willing to go do public tree planting as the people that were living on the adjacent streets. That loss produced a heightened stewardship. And in addition to that, 80% of the households that lost a street tree responded with some kind of habitat enhancement. And I love this one because there were a whole handful of people that very carefully put a little circle of flowers, almost like a burial site, for what was left after they took the stump out of the easement garden. But these show a range of things that people did: grass, seeds, sod, flowers, shrubs, trees, and other. And this was done close to the time that it all happened. So, okay, the next is designing for stewardship by example and social contagion. And in this case, I looked. That last study had me going over all the streets in Ann Arbor and really getting a good look at it. And one thing I noticed was that these easement gardens, you know, the little garden that's between the curb and the sidewalk, when I'd see one, I'd see more. And after, you know, a couple months in the field with these ash borer tree deals, I realized that they were clustered, spatially clustered. And I went around and actually looked to see if that was the case. And sure enough. So if you see something like that, you can't just say, well, this is how it happens. You have to actually measure it. So I did that. So so what I did was look at, and this is one by one with human beings, 22,500 properties on the ground, and they were geocoded. And we did this by walking and bicycling, and every garden that we came across had 15 traits that were scored, so we knew what the quality of them was. There's a lot more data that goes with this research, but I'm going to just tell you these main points. 11% of that over 22,000 gardens had easement gardens, which is pretty high. And 64% of the easement gardens were visually adjacent to one another. And I'll show you what that means in 1 second. And then based on this proximity, there was a significant contagion effect. And a variety of GIS statistical measurements were done with the help of Dan Brown, in addition to all the regular ones that had already done, to really nail that this geographic aspect was correct, and moreover to try to find out how big the sphere of influence was. And it was greatest within 100 yards from home. And home is measured as the front of the property, so basically what you'd see from your front porch, your front walk. So it was always out this way. We never took into account, you know, the people around the block. We just went cab forward, looking forward. You can see briefly from the map that the cluster sizes range, and I think I have a little bit on that up here. Yes, I do. So here's we had photographs of every single one of these gardens, and 50% of them, okay, let's do the visually adjacent test. This is what I was just explaining to you. Here's the street. If this was the house that had the garden, we looked in those directions, next door and across the street and or kitty corner, whatever it took. There's some really crazy good spatial statistics that can do stuff like this once you have the map. So we found that half of the gardens, when you found one, there were two. 25% there were 3. 25% had 4 or more, and the biggest one had 16. And then if you put that through tests for contagion, this is contagion, and the contagion doesn't happen like by wind dispersal of seeds, it happens by action of people, and so that's why it's called social contagion. So that was pretty exciting, because what that meant is you had the potential to change the availability of urban nature, the linkages for flyways, for all kinds of organisms through a otherwise fragmented environment by simply getting the people in your town to build these streetscapes. You know, they're any place that has sidewalks. And even if they were not, you could still do them at the edge of your lawn. So you can have streets that look like the two on the left, or you can have ones that look like this. And you know, there are programs for a number of things that are positive, sustainable behaviors in cities now, that cities are willing to pay for the first people out to do them, so that they're the examples. And then if other people see it and they like it, you know, 'cause people don't like things that are new, even if they're cool over there. So this is something where the city could set up a program for installing these, help pay maybe for some of the plants, and then give people the information about how to do it. There's a whole second part of this study. It's actually a second study, which I The data's analyzed, but I haven't published it yet. It's one of my 2 papers that I still have to publish. And that showed that the people that were the first installers did it for sustainability purposes. I'll just say that for ease. And the people that followed, because they told us what years in these surveys they installed, the followers, the contagious people, people that got it, they did it because they liked what they saw, and usually their neighbors helped them do it because they were usually pretty excited about the whole thing. So what an easy way to increase quality habitat in urban areas in connected corridors. I mean, it's like, duh. Okay, and the last thing I'm going to talk about is ecological resilience, and this gets to the plant choice, use of native plants, making it beautiful and wonderful aspect that I know that you're all interested in. And this is what I was saying at the beginning about we've got to get to the bottom-up group if we want to have this change happen fast enough. And one of the main points that I've made in many of the types of research that I've done is that aesthetics count. Design makes a difference and aesthetics count, because if you could get people on board, that's half the battle, if not more. So you design for a positive aesthetic response and good ecological function. It's very easy to tie those 2 things together. And attachment to nature will grow, especially if you're taking nature pills. You're like, oh, this makes me feel so much better. And people will take care of it in the long term because we take care of what we love. So I have these couple little cartoons that try to just give you a quick, simple insight into the psychology of how this works. So our initial response to anything, it's one of those autonomic nervous system things. It's triggered, it just happens. It's not the product of thinking. But it does come in the form of an emotional response that's tempered by our physiological state. Low blood sugar might not have the same reaction as if you've eaten recently. So sensory input, emotional reaction in the context of physiological state. That's the first thing that happens. The second thing that happens is we get that old thinking in there. The cognitive aspects come in. So our culture, our memories of that, our experience and memories of those, and the knowledge that we've picked up all come in here. And that's when we start making judgments. This is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, whatever. And it goes on. And you know, that can get compromised by other things. So, but we still have to deal with that. So when we're designing and planting, we have to take into account that people have all these other things going on in their own contextual background, and we have to try to do something for everybody. We can do it for ourselves, but we have to be a little bit aware of what might be good for other people too, especially if we're doing public spaces. In your own garden, you can do whatever you want. So ultimately, the response will include both of these things, affect and cognition. So this, I just want you to get a very teeny tiny print that my sister made for me because she forgot that I don't read really teeny tiny. Before I do this, what I would like everybody to do, if you're willing to, before I read this, it's a quote from a recently published paper. I would like everybody to consider pausing for just a moment. We'll just have be fully present in the moment, and I'm going to just describe to you some physical world. So if you just lower your eyes, you don't have to close them if you don't want to, and then afterwards we'll talk about it for just a second. Okay? So everybody get comfortable in your chair. Imagine walking along a pebbled path in a traditional manicured English garden. To the right and left, a rows of neatly lined flowers. They're beautiful. Now, imagine standing on jagged, lush cliffs, taking in a view of ocean waves crashing against rocky walls. Beautiful. There are certain people that do mindfulness meditation that would call something like that the introduction to a glimpse meditation. It only takes a second to do, but it can just sort of be a little reset button. So whatever happened to you when you were doing that, know that you can do that anytime you want with any scene or any idea. So I guess what I'd like to ask you is, did those different places evoke a different reaction to you that you are aware of now, if I'm asking you about it? And if anybody would care to share, that would be great.
Well, I thought the flowers made me feel peaceful and calm and happy. And then the oceanscape with the waves crashing against the rocks was happy too, but it was more exciting.
Could you repeat a few of those things up in your microphone? Repeat a couple of things that they said so it gets picked up on the...
Oh, on this microphone. Oh. Could you just say that again?
Say it into your jacket or something.
Okay, the first garden had a reaction of tranquility and peace, and the first reaction had a reaction of tranquility and peace, and the second one had a more lively, excited, interested, that kind of engaged reaction. So anybody else wanna? I'll just stand next to you so we don't have to do that, and we'll do.
I just cut 3 maple trees from my lawn, from my yards. The reason is the amount of work that's needed every fall to clean up that leaves. I just burden my and each time I plant 3 big maple trees, I'm not thinking of how beautiful they are, but how much work I have to do every fall. And that's, I think, if you can, in designing garden or plants, maybe you should take consideration of how much damage they use to destroy the lawn. Like oak tree, for instance, the leaves are very difficult to deteriorate over years.
That's right.
Maple, of course, is easier.
Yeah.
So, is there any way for you to help in that respect? What tree that we have to plant
Yes.
to decrease the amount?
And what the consideration that you just brought up is one that often happens in public places that aren't parks. So like public plazas where you want to have some green. And you can't have that excessive litter, and you can't have this and that. Well, you do have some of that, and then you have big, loud, noisy machines that take them away. But like in your own yard, you can just choose to not have trees. And there's ways to do, evergreens are a good example of something that you could use, even open ones that don't block all the light, that you won't have those same problems with. And then there's also plenty of perennials that take care of themselves if you pick the right ones and you put them together. They go through their whole recycling of themselves, and you might only have to do something once a year, and it's pretty straightforward. So there are ways around it. So did you like the English manicured garden the best? Or the Rocky Shore. Don't have to do anything there. Just not fall in.
Yes, as long as it's in other people's yard.
Everybody, yeah, to each his own, right? Okay, let me go very quickly through a way to select a plant palette so that you build a plant community that has a lot of ecological resilience, even if in the face of climate change and unpredictable highs and lows that are coming with climate change.
That sounds good, so don't hurry too much.
Okay. Did I go past the extra one? Oh yeah, this is a lovely example of very modernistic design that was done by Mik Young Kim's group, and it's for the Farrar Pond Garden that's in it's in Massachusetts. I think it's near Boston. And this does some of the same things that the High Line in New York does, but it does it with a lot less management. So they picked very interesting ground covers that would stay green and withstand feet, still let people walk through them, but still gave the idea that they were taking care of stormwater at the same time as part of one of the themes of this park. Here are a handful of pictures that I took in Germany a couple of years ago, right before COVID. I went to visit there to see how the garden cities of Germany looked almost 100 years after that movement had started in Germany. They were probably the first to use wild plants that they got. They didn't care if they were native or not. They just wanted to be native somewhere, but they chose them to be in certain places based on the ecology of the city. So a lot of the manufacturing areas had steppe type environments, rocky, shallow soils with poor nutrients and a lot of toxins in them. And a lot of the steppe environments have exactly those same conditions. So they went to the steppe habitats, and a lot of them were like in Russia and that part of the world, found out what the native plants were that had different ecological traits, and figured out by common garden design transplants at like 6 different places in Germany and 1 in Switzerland, which ones they could plant around old industrial sites. Very brilliant idea. And this is one of the situations in which you might say that the use of native species not of place might be valuable. And they use German plants when they can, but you know, the thing about Europe is that so much of their flora and fauna has been transplanted here and there and everywhere that it's a little different than North America. We still have a lot of pristine areas. But anyway, this is just an example of what they did in an industrial complex area. And these pictures do not even begin to tell you what it felt like to be in that space. The workers were like, they had a manufacturing plant, they had engineers, they had designers all working on solar paneling or something like that. And when they first started to put it in, they were like, what is this? And after about a year, they go out in their lunch breaks, they have they made a whole area where people could sit out and have their lunch. And even when they don't do that, they just go and they walk around the whole property because they love it. It makes them feel good. And so Bettina, the designer, she's done this in a number of places throughout Germany, and very beautiful work. So when she did that, she did the same. She didn't do exactly the same thing, but she followed the German plan. And this plan here, and I did not even know this when I published this paper. I never knew about the German plan until like about, another 6 or 7 years. But it breaks it down in a way that any home gardener or any plant designer could use to pick a plant palette that'll be climate resistant and will be beautiful also, and can be native, completely native. We all know that one of our first indications as gardeners was the shift in plant zone, what plant zone we were called, because winters, deep cold winters were getting less cold, and so everything moved up. But so this shows the 1990 map, which was already a shift, and then they did it in 2006, and you can see that the pale green in Michigan has expanded quite a bit just with that number of years data addition. The data goes back about 50 years that goes into this map, so it's not just like this is what happened in these years. It actually takes the long look. It just shifts that frame of time. Are people familiar with it? I feel like this is something everybody's like seen too many times already. Okay. So the adaptation strategy that I used here was based on what I had learned in ecology and population ecology. These are the features of any population, whether it's an insect or a mammal or a human or a flower. that are going to be important. One is plasticity, and then functional redundancy, response diversity, and structural diversity. Now I'm going to go through each one of these, give you a very simple definition, and show you an example. So plasticity is how well a species performs along a range of conditions, just as you would imagine it would be. So for example, how well do species handle overwintering temperature shifts? So if you look at American mountain ash, it can be planted in zones 2 to 9. So the way I did it for the evaluation and for the plant sheets that guided you was I just did a subtraction there. So there's the plasticity got 8. There are 8 zones included there. Versus pin cherry, which only goes from 2 to 6. It's a little bit cooler loving species. So its plasticity was 5. So that's one of the things you consider when you plant plants, that to have some that they have some variation in the range of how well they do when it's way too cold or way too hot for too long. Okay, so we're going to take the case of pollinators. Oh, no, there's one more here. Oh, no. There we go. Functional redundancy. Second one, this is the number of species that can do the same ecosystem function. So let's just say the ecosystem function is pollination. So in this case here, you can see that in the month of July, there are 6 species here that all act as pollinator resources, and it just so happens in the month of July they are all flowering. So there's very, very high functional redundancy in the month of July. If you look at June, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. So that's another way you can consider it, because if spring comes early and summer comes early, then maybe you want to have some plants that have got a wider spread and some overlap so that there's always pollinator resources there. Now, the next trait combines the plasticity considerations with the functional redundancy. And this is where you have to really sit down and start working out what you need to do. But it's very doable. So again, we have the same 6 species, et cetera, just what you saw before. But if we look at the characteristics for soil moisture needs in this column, butterfly weeds, dry to moderate. This one does anything. Maybe not as well, but can do everything, et cetera. Here's a wet, moist one. So you have all of that to consider. And then hardiness zones, how the extremes of heat and cold will do. So the wideness of the plasticity in the hardiness range can help cover your butt, basically, because you've got a lot of different plants that'll be able to handle any of these crazy swings and changes in the temporal seasons that we're seeing. So you just get out a little piece of graph paper and you just write these things down, and it's actually really easy to do. Another one of the attributes of community structure is response diversity. So it's how do we collectively handle something like a shift in rainfall regime. So if we look at these 3 species, and by the way, these 3 species are all considered, consider the soil moisture conditions for the 3 species that support the pollinator services in mid to late summer. So Joe Pyeweed is a wet moist, purple coneflower can do everything, and rose verbena is dry moist. So if we have these 3 plants, then they will all be able to coexist, and they will be able to cover all the different possible situations. Now that just might mean in a year that your type isn't getting the conditions that they really need. It doesn't necessarily mean you'll lose it that year. A lot of times it just means that it won't flower, it'll just be kind of wimpy, but then the next year it'll come back. So that's another consideration you can make when you pick the plant palette. And the final attribute is structural diversity, and there is the physical structure allows a lot of niche diversity, especially for insects and in smaller organisms, but birds and other things too. So just to put that on the map, not all these species are highly tolerant of drought and flooding, and yet if you put them together, you'll get that structural diversity as well. So this is an example of a design which I don't think I'm telling you much more about, but it followed the rules of how you use the plants in this way so that it had a maximum capability to deal with anything that came up and still stay hardy for pollinators for probably 2 to 3 years unless you had the same horrible thing happen for more than that period of time. You'll notice that the structure looks good in both winter and summer. Different, but it's still there. And one of the problems with a lot of the pollinator gardens is in the wintertime, they just flop and they look so bad that you've got to cut them off, you know, at the end of fall, and then there's nothing there, and then they usually look pretty bad for a while. So if you're thinking of people on the street, trying to take a nature pill, looking across the street, trying to decide if they're going to put an easement garden in, it'd probably be good to pick one that had really good structural diversity throughout the year. You know, the winter form works for at least a subset of the plants. Finally, the aesthetic component of it can come in many forms. You could choose movement as something that you thought was really important, and in which case you might pick these 3 species that are shown up here. So if I had a list of things that I was interested in, to be part of my aesthetics, I would look at this chart over here. That's the small versus tall plants, trees with focal blooms, a lime pink presence, because maybe that's the color I was really interested in, which you start to see up here. Contrasting fall palette, plant motion, sculptural silhouettes, always important in the winter, and then very important, seed heads and berries for birds and animals. So if you look at the way the plant design could turn out, you could have a plant palette that included, for some reason I just can't get this one right, that included for the fall months these particular traits being outstanding. And what you use a chart for like this mostly for is to make sure the things that you want to have there are there, and to make sure that there aren't gaps during the year when they're absent. And then, of course, with all this comes the problem that you brought up about management. You want to have a management plan that's reasonable, because if it's not, unless you're just dedicated and you don't mind if you have to be out there all the time, it's going to fail, or it'll look really bad because you didn't manage it. So again, this is just a final comment. Again, it's a word slide for any people that don't get to listen to this live, but you set the resilience goals you want. For example, you want to have, and then you follow accommodating each of these ecological community traits, which will collectively make it strong under situations that are tough, and you'll make it beautiful. And just by having it there, that in itself will begin to generate a stewardship response in the people that see it. Not just you, but the people that see it and use it, especially if it helps give them peace. Here's an example of a design that's in one of the papers that was up that describes this process. And this was the picture for one of the gardens after the design criteria was to both safeguard the contribution of butterflies and birds, okay, so we sort of already had that, but year-round engagement aesthetically, not just in the warmer months. And finally, and this was the killer to pick the plants for this one, salt and drought tolerance, and low enough so that it abided by the safety rules of 3 to 8 feet have to be clear for automobiles at the crossing. So, okay, so all of those, but I did, yeah, you can read those. But this one had the add-on of those killer design criteria. I can't tell you how many times that I've done that to students. I've said, okay, we can do this and this and this, and isn't this great? Look at this. But everything has to be salt tolerant. Oh, the possibilities just drop, And then what are you left with? Then you really have to work. But that a lot of times is the problem. It's one of the reasons why DOT has a hard time making really nice looking islands and sides of freeways, because they have a huge number of design criteria that really limit the plant selections. So when they find a good one, then they use it everywhere, and it's like, oh, that again? But there's always more plants to try that just haven't been brought into use in those ways. So if you have, designers or gardeners of public spaces or of your own streets and backyards, you can help change what people think is beautiful by bringing something new in that fulfills the design criteria, so it looks great and everybody loves it. The manageable challenges here, and these are manageable. Biodiversity can be constrained if you overdo plasticity choices. So you always pick plants that are plastic, highly plastic on all those counts. The plant palette shrinks really quick. So you've got to have some dangerous ones in there that might not make it. Then you use your experience in talking to other people who work in nurseries. What's going to be my best choice? Second, long-term management plans must accompany all planting designs, because if they start looking bad, forget about it. Reliable databases must be built for regional and local areas, and now they have, since I started teaching this and doing this research, the plant databases are enormous, and now most nurseries feel like it's their responsibility to have a plant database, which they put up online for all the things that they have. Especially native plant nurseries are really good with that, like wild type. And then finally, design has to be an equal part, an equal partner in the planning of your plant palette. It can't be an afterthought. It has to be really right there from the beginning. There's all these benefits. I think the ones that I like the best, I'll just point out because you can probably skim them, but it protects biodiversity in urban areas, and it goes well past pollinators, well past them. And it offers assisted migration at a very low cost. So one of the things that has been done with trees, and you can certainly do it with trees in your yard or your park or whatever you're working on, as well as herbaceous plants, is to choose plants that are just at the edge of your range and normally aren't carried by the nurseries because they're a little bit dangerous to put in, or nobody's asked for them enough. But if you're going to get the native versions of them, go to the suppliers in those places, like go down to West Virginia and don't go at the top of the mountain, go at the bottom and start to decide if there's some things that you might want to bring in. Now, they might not be native in the sense that they're currently existing in Michigan, but the Michigan weather is different now. So one of the things that the silviculturists did first in industry, but now people are doing in earnest, is they're trying out trees. They're putting in a variety of trees, and some of them are ones that normally occur farther south. So they'll have something going if the trees start going really quick. Yes, well suited for supporting human psychological health, which is where I started, and so I will just thank you at this point. Well, it's really late now. Does anybody have any? Yeah.
Repeat that question.
Okay.
The survey of the plants or the gardens in the health strip that you did, how long after the emerald ash borer came through was that study?
I'm sorry, could you say the very beginning of that again? I think I wasn't fully present.
The study that you did with all of the health strip gardens and the neighbors copying other neighbors.
Yes.
How long after that the emerald ash borer came through was that?
The emerald ash borer was still killing trees when I did that, but I think the bulk of them had died, but were just being removed maybe about 3 or 4 years prior. but the ash borer was still around because I saw still active trees.
Thank you. I'm an avid gardener, but nature doesn't like me. When I moved to Plymouth 20 years ago, I moved onto a wooded lot with wildflowers, and I developed allergy-induced asthma. These are my nature pills: Allegra, Benadryl, inhaled steroids, monthly allergy injections, and anti-venom shots for all the bees and bugs. So with climate change taking place, allergy seasons are extended, so you have more asthma and more allergy taking place. So I'm all about beauty. I love nature. I love my walks, but it's taken a toll on my health, and I just wonder if that was a consideration, you know, when people are outdoors. I have to prepare myself every day. I mean, it's winter and I still have to take these pills to go outside. So, you know, it's something that just to think about. I don't know if anybody else has allergies and asthma or anything. I mean, or if you get stung like I do.
Thank you.
Negative.
Thank you for bringing that up. And I'm sorry that it's that bad. I have little bits of allergies at certain times of the year, but a lot of children have asthma. And it seems that people are having more problems with allergies now, a combination of climate change, and I think when people were indoors a lot for COVID, then they were exposed all of a sudden to a lot, and a lot of people seem to be complaining more. Complaining is not the right word, with justice, you know. It's a problem. So one of the things that can happen is there have been a decent number of studies to show that experience of nature from inside is very effective. Even looking at pictures of it. Now I know that that's not what you want to do, but that is true. Also, during the winter when I had a really hard time getting out, not for the reasons that you said, I would go in my car, and I had a certain driving route where I knew there wasn't going to be any cars, and I would just drive in my car, and then I would park it, and then I would go home, and that did it. So that helped.
In my experience,
Masking.
all the medication, nature outweighs all the medication. I'm not complaining about it because I'll do whatever I can to be outdoors. You know, so it's really a compliment to what you're talking about, the value of nature. I wish I didn't have this issue.
No, nobody's ever asked that question or brought that up, but I have to think about it more. I might have some more of an answer for you if I get a chance to think about it. But yeah, because there's nothing that beats being outside.
No?
Thank you. Anybody else? Well, thank you so much for your patience on the time, and thank you very much to our IT people for all the hard work you did to make sure that this worked. I really appreciate it. It was great. So thank you. Yeah.
Carol, I have just one question. Are you going to be publishing more? How can we learn from you more? Are you sort of publishing a lay book anytime soon? I mean, there was so many aspects of your talk that are applicable to what we are excited about.
Well, I have two papers I have two papers that I have the data for, and I've started analyzing it. So my plan in the next year is to get those out. After COVID was over, I had that like post-COVID whatever, or that COVID whatever it was. I just couldn't get myself to do anything, and I was separated from everybody. But no, I'm excited about it now. So I don't have I'm still on UC's faculty list, and the new stuff would go on my CV, I guess, for that.
Thank you.
Okay. I don't have a website or anything.
Not yet, okay.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks so much.
You're welcome.